Good. Hi, Michael. Good evening.
Hi,
I think,
how are
I
you?
guess, I guess good evening, or maybe good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are.
No, good evening will do just fine. Thank you very
Good.
much. It's
Excellent.
about 9 o'clock here.
Yeah. Okay. So Europe, yeah.
No, South Africa.
Oh, South Africa. Okay.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Very good.
At least you have power.
At the moment, yeah. We'll see for how long.
Yeah, fascinating.
Indeed.
So we've got
Yeah, I'm just doing the
Gabby
thing
here.
in the background.
Yeah. Mhm.
And if I've done that right, we will be going live to
Yeah.
YouTube.
Very good. Yeah. Says it's now being live streamed. So very good.
Wow. Okay, cool. And if
So
I've done
behave
that right,
ourselves.
we will be going live to. Excellent. Cool. All right, shall we start? Welcome everyone to the Good Company Way. We do have a peripatetic timing, which is quite nice. This is in our later session because our speaker's in New York, which makes me need to say the Good Company Way live from New York tonight, which is quite nice. Yeah, as you know, Mike and I tend to hang out with Michael Baxter in the ESG show, and on that show, Ellen was very masterful when she was talking about all things carbon reporting. So we thought we'd like to have a special session just looking at carbon reporting and just the general questions of carbon and everything else that's coming out of the whole environmental E part of ESG. So welcome, Ellen. Do you want to tell us a little bit about you, your company, where your expertise is coming from?
Sure. Thanks so much for the invitation. So I was raised by parents that were heavily affected by the Depression in the United States. And so to me, sustainability growing up was hand-me-downs and leftovers, right? And so being part of my life since a kid, I instilled that in my children, and now happy to report that I get sustainable gifts for birthday and Mother's Day and things like that. And from a career perspective, I've been in technology for more years than I'd like to admit. And so right now, marrying those two together, I am the Director of Advisory and ESG Services at Orion Global Solutions, based in New York City, and we are a Salesforce implementation partner.
Very good.
So one of the things that I do at Orion as the Director of ESG Services is I run that part of the business. And the reason why we have an ESG Services is twofold. One, because our CEO, Yakov Brochurinsky, is very much involved with sustainability on a personal level and a professional level. And two, in late 2019, early 2020, I might have that off a little bit, Salesforce came out with a product called Sustainability Cloud. So we jumped on board that bandwagon and learned that product and got really close with the product team. And that product is now called Net Zero Cloud. And what started as just a tool to help with carbon accounting has evolved to a full ESG product. So there's information not only about the carbon emissions, but also about diversity, inclusion, equality, governance, and report writer capabilities to pull all that together with a couple frameworks, including GRI and CDP, or you can create your own in order to easily or more easily report on that data as opposed to sort of cut and paste or export import kind of thing.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, so lots to nibble at and talk about there a little bit. Let's let's assume that some people might watch the video, or some people here might not have a kind of a deeper background of what ESG is, or the sustainability side. So let's take a step right back. Okay, so let's carbon, reducing carbon, all to do with climate change and the and the escalating temperatures and rising temperature, and we'll have seen a lot of that recently. And the various targets out there for companies. So what should companies be thinking about, and the companies you're working with, what are they thinking about? What are they trying to do in terms of setting their own goals? Are they ambitious? Are they trying to take this from a kind of a compliance point of view? Are they trying to make the market like them? What's and I know you'll probably say all of the above, but yeah, let's talk us through what you think is going on and why they're doing it. Yeah.
Sure. There are a lot of reasons why an organization would jump into ESG, right? Environmental, social governance, and the reporting around that. Typically, what we're seeing with our clients, and they range in size and they range across multiple industries, is getting to an accurate baseline. So although some of them may have ESG consultants and have goals to reduce emissions, before they can really set those goals, they have to understand where they are today. And a lot of them are leveraging some online spreadsheets, which can get you only so far. Certainly, if you've ever tried to enter data in a spreadsheet, it can be a little cumbersome. And what we find is human error can really cause an issue when you're talking about putting together data that you're going to put in a report that may be public, because we all know what happens if you make a mistake with your ESG reports, right? There's no turning back, and the internet will jump all over you if they think that you're close to telling us something that's not right. So spreadsheets aren't the way to go. And a lot of our customers that's where they are. So they're moving into a platform that has some automation around and safeguards around the data, so that they have a more accurate calculation, and are trusting the information and getting a true baseline. Because not only can the tool show them where they are today, but there's analytics that will show based on the data we have this year. And a lot of time we'll upload some history to give them a good amount of data. They show the trajectory of where they're going, and that's where they have the opportunity to start making decisions. And that's where they can communicate with an ESG specialist or a consultant that says, okay, now that we have your data, let's see how you got there. So what I mean by that is, are your employees flying more than they need to be? Can they do some of those virtual? Can they take a train? Things where easy ways to reduce emissions. And then there are more difficult options. You own a few buildings and they've had the heating system there for a really long time and it's really not efficient, and maybe we need to just redo the whole heating system in a building, and that can make a huge impact on emissions. So until you get to that baseline and you understand where you are and where it looks like your organization is going, I think that's when then the goals come in, and it can be for all the reasons that you stated, including attracting or appeasing customers.
Excellent. Yeah, love it. Cool. I'm going to start with a couple of questions I've seen around. And some of them might be a little bit topical and some of them might not be. So first of all, there's a huge debate around about back to work or not back to work, or yeah. What's your feeling on the accounting and the carbon elements of that, and how people are treating it? Yeah.
That's an interesting question. Certainly the travel back to work, the more people in an office that would require more utilities, more heat, more air conditioning for the organization itself, is something they need to take into consideration. However, they also need to take into consideration what's happening at the employee remote location. So I do work at
yeah.
home a lot, right? So my commuting, I usually commute by train and then walk when I get off the train. I'm based in New York City. So my emissions were low. However, you know, are my emissions equal sitting at my desk with my heat and my air conditioning in my in my house? Is that equal to what I would have used sitting at my desk in my office? Right? I have to heat my whole house. Do we take into consideration my whole house because I'm home, or do they take into consideration just the area of my house that my home office takes up? And then you have to ask how many organizations are actually doing that. Are they asking their employees, hey, you're not here. Can you give us your utility bill and the percentage of your office that's your home? I mean, in the United States, when you have a home office, if you're self-employed, there's a tax deduction on the percentage of your home that you work. You don't get that as an employee, but if you're giving your employer those calculations, then they can include them in their emissions calculations. And the question is, you know, are organizations really doing that? So from an emissions standpoint, potentially having people come back to the office would make the reporting more accurate, but at the same time, most likely cause more emissions in the commute.
Yeah, I guess with employees, the the commute. Oh, that's an interesting question. Are people actually calculating? So let's say I'm a 20-minute drive from my last on-site employer that I had here. If I was an employee and I start going there, is anyone even asking the employees how far they're traveling? I wonder.
And it's not always distance. If you have
your
been to New York
vehicle,
City,
yeah.
I literally live in Queens, so I live 16 miles from Manhattan, and some days it's a half hour and some days it's an hour and a half. So I can easily be idling down, you know, the highway slowly, causing a lot more emissions than the half-hour train it would take for me to get to work.
Cool. So typically, who in an organization is making these decisions as to what's going in the reports? Is it the compliance side? Is it because these reports are under CFO? Is it the accountancy side? Where does that sit?
So it should sit across the full leadership team. It's not a siloed department, and it can't be a siloed department because data has to come from all areas of an organization. And if you have a sustainability team, that's great because you're leading the charge, but you need the buy-in of everyone in leadership, whether it's CEO, CFO, COO, or president, vice president, however the organization is structured. And when you have those kinds of conversations across leadership, then you have much better adoption across the organization, and it becomes much more easier to get the data you need to get to those calculations. So it's really across the board ownership. Certainly you have compliance issues, and that is could be your CIO, your CTO, it could be your HR department, right? Because you have a lot of governance there. So the end result of a well-structured ESG report needs to have the buy-in of multiple leadership so that each element of it is appropriate and communicated appropriately for the organization.
Interesting. Yeah. We were talking to Celia last week about B Corps, and in the process of becoming a B Corp, there's you have to give all your information, give all your data and your information, and then you've also got to commit to improving. So if you aren't improving, you can have the B Corp kind of stamp ripped off. I'm guessing in that kind of scenario, the guidelines are clearer because they're coming from B Corp, whereas with the general guidelines we've got out there under ESG, that there seems to be the ability to do a lot more interpretation. Yeah.
Sure, and there's lots of frameworks and there's lots of guidelines, and now they're starting to become regulations. So it depends where you look and what you want to do, right? If you're a B Corp, then yeah, those are strict guidelines to maintain that level of organization, and it's great and it's ambitious. And I think if you start as a B Corp, then you have the right mentality to do that. When you're not a B Corp at the beginning, and then you try to become a B Corp, it's definitely a hurdle. But you have to have, it's not a one and done, right? You have to have that long-term plan. You have to understand where you are today and how you are going to take those steps to make things better. And, one concern that I have with organizations reporting is if they modify the framework, or if they report this year in a slightly different way than they reported last year.
Yeah.
So it looks like there's improvement, but it's really not a comparison. It's not a true comparison of what they did last year to what they did this year if you start changing the way in which you're going to report your data. So, there's a lot of conversations about standardizing it, which a lot of organizations are trying to do, and it all has to come together. There needs to be one, right? And then you can actually understand. But I think in the end, it's all about just doing the right thing. And rather than trying to, win an award or get a certain ranking, if you can continuously report accurately and show that, hey, I'm taking this seriously and I'm making changes that have an impact, that's what we want organizations to do, right?
Yeah.
It's really just make things better.
Yeah. I've never thought of organizations as being evil. Yeah. I've always thought of organizations as being lazy and incompetent. So I think I would imagine a lot of the time it's, but there's a thing, have you ever heard of McNamara fallacy?
No.
It's kind of, so McNamara was a very famous guy. So this is going back to Vietnam War time. So Robert McNamara ran Ford, and he ran it with all the data he had, and he knew where everything could be, and he made lots and lots of money. And so because he was so great at running that huge corporation, nobody batted an eyelid when he came over to be defense secretary to run the Vietnam War. So he tried to run the Vietnam War, which is around about people, jungles, tunnels, not knowing where everyone is, not knowing how many people died, things, and he was trying to run it like the Ford factory. So the McNamara fallacy, a little bit about that. It's like, making decisions off of incomplete data set. Yeah. And also making your decisions on the data you have and not going out to get more data. And this is the interesting thing, I think, with a lot of organizations, that they're maybe not thinking strategically about this in the long term. They're just thinking of it as another return, might be thinking of it like another nuisance getting in the way of us kind of making money. And if they're tackling it in that mindset, they'll be trying to do something that's complete. They'll be trying to do something that's accurate, but they won't be pushing it. They won't be. That's my thought. I don't know.
It's Scott, it's Gavin here. Can you hear me?
I can.
I've got my little green light on my laptop, but I can't see my picture, so I don't know whether I'm visible or not. But anyway,
you're not. So you can pick your nose. That's good.
Yeah, very good. But I'm attempting to be visible. Anyway, and then so it's related to a question I was going to have. So I've got a lot of experience in around data, and just learning my way through, starting to learn my way through ESG at the moment. So my question is going to be, in your experience, well, I can see data governance has been massively important around the controls you need to have in place to accurately report on data and make sure you've got consistency and ownership around the data. Do you see organizations trying to hook into their existing data space, their data governance teams, or do you see them sort of creating their own sort of ESG set of metrics and reporting? I mean, you can tell what I'm getting at in terms of what I think the right answer is, but just in terms of your experience, are organizations following this up as an independent program, or are they thinking how they can join up into other parts of their organization?
So from what we've seen, it's a little bit of both. So the sustainability team is spearheading the program, right? But they have to get data from everywhere else in the organization. So we haven't seen a change in where the data already lies. We need to understand where that data resides, how to get it out appropriately, right? We don't necessarily need all of it. We need what's pertinent to the calculation of the emissions. And then there's data validation around that. And that's our process, right? As soon as we get data from the client, all we can do is validate that the data they gave us is equal to the data that wound up in the system. We don't necessarily know that they've given us 100% of the data, and we don't necessarily know if that data is correct. That's their responsibility to say, we approve of data, and then we get it in the system. So we haven't seen any changes and in the data governance within an organization, because each of the various departments that own that data still need to own that data. And in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's very much one of the key messages I push whenever you're implementing data governance is you find where the business owners are for the data, regardless of what it is you're reporting, whether it's a typical business KPI reporting or whatever it is. The business ownership doesn't lie with the data team or the technology team. It absolutely lies in there with the business. So I was interested whether this is seen as a sort of an additional add-on to a set of responsibilities, or whether they're rolling us into, well, you need to collect data anyway to hopefully to add some value to the business, and this is adding on to an existing set of ways of working that are sourcing data, validating it, driving data quality, and then reporting on it, because that would feel to be maybe an easier land in terms of the messaging, rather than just set up separate processes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we need to use in the ESG reporting, we need to use the same data that's being used in all the other reporting within the organization.
And that for me is a real value add. So it's not just a big stick that's being wielded to tell you to report an ESG, but if you're collecting all this data, then there will inevitably be some value add you can have if that data's there and available for more general reporting and insight and analysis.
Excellent. And anyone else got any other questions just now? It seems a good point to let's talk about the things that we talked about earlier. Maybe growing a little bit deeper in that. And I love the questions from the floor. I think that what makes this format different from a podcast. Yeah.
All righty. So everyone's quiet now.
Okay.
So we can move on.
Okay, let's talk about some of the non-environmental stuff. So one thing that Mike and I noticed early on was when we talked to people, there was a lot of interest in Africa, around about governance. There was a lot of interest in the US around about like the social policies and things. And a lot of interest in Europe from the environmental side. So almost like these kind of the ES and the G had like a geographic mapping thing. So I think we've talked about the environmental side a little bit. Let's talk about the social side. I'm guessing a lot of that information is coming from HR, but also in some of marketing and things. If we're looking at the external brand perception and that. So what's your experiences about? Is there anything unusual you've seen in there that some companies have put that you haven't, or anything around about that? It seems a softer, nebulous area of reporting. Yeah.
That's interesting phrasing. It's a different kind of impact, right? For both the organization and the perception of the customers, right? So you want employees to be treated fairly, and you want a level of equity and philanthropy and inclusion, however you define that, right? And so the information that gets put into the system that we represent is anonymous, because we don't need to know who, right? We just need to know the demographics that enable an organization to, and sometimes uncover things they hadn't necessarily seen before, because to Gavin's point, this might be new data, or at least a new analysis of existing data, because you hadn't really gone through that before. So from a social standpoint, it's a lot of the employee demographic data, but it's also the community data, some philanthropy data, volunteerism, and employee programs, things like that, that really get captured in some of the tools there are of external tools that really help organizations create those kinds of programs. And so that data can either be exported or integrated. And then on the governance side, it really just comes down to a couple things, and there is a little bit of an overlap. So the governance comes down to some of your policies, right, and your legal documentation. But there's also a little overlap with governance and social, because you start to look at who's on the board, who's in leadership. And so that becomes the governance and the execution of governing. And is there diversity there? And is there, equity and inclusion in the leadership? And how does that, how does that affect the way the organization is run?
Yeah.
So the governance really has that sort of overlap between policies and, documents and rules, and then, who's making all those.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we get in the UK a lot is there's a lot of big UK brands that have really almost shrunk down to the UK element being design. Yeah. And all of the work gets done in India or other places. It's outsourced. And I wonder, in the social side, maybe this is more of a UK thing, because I do know there's still a lot of manufacturing and things in the USA. There's a lot less here. I just wonder if the emphasis on employees, when actually employees are just a fraction of the overall value adding supply chain, and how the supply chain should be viewed in that reporting as well, because it could wipe out anything you're doing.
So the supply chain is definitely a headline that I'm seeing more and more often. As organizations have started to do their ESG reporting, they are realizing that their upstream and downstream become a big portion of their emissions to begin with, and that's difficult to gather. But to your point, your upstream, your suppliers, right, your contractors, and where are they sitting on the ESG scale? So you're absolutely right. Here I sit in New York City. We're a service company, but if I were a manufacturer, here I sit running my headquarters in New York City, where my products are being developed in a different country, and how is that being managed, and how are those people being treated? And that is the bigger picture, certainly. So supply chain, and getting that information from the supply chain, so that using my example of coming back to me in New York, if I'm the one creating the report, I do need to look at where does my product start, that whole ESG element. I need to gather that data. I need to then look at what I do with my product, and then what happens to my product down the line, right? End of life, the circular economy. Like, there's a lot more in the conversation when you start talking about product versus service. And there are a lot more people involved that are indirect to what I can manage in my organization, that are going to affect all of the ESG. How is my product being used? Is it being used ethically? Was it built ethically? And these are all conversations that are, I think, for organizations that are truly serious about ESG, they're starting to be had much more seriously. And it's really easy to see how it interconnects everyone. It's not just me and my organization.
Yeah, I heard one large organization that was looking at its DEI policy, or over here we say EDI, which is kind of just one of those transatlantic things. And they started looking at their development and the center and trying to get more more equality in there. But when they looked at it and they looked at their subcontractors, they decided not to include the subcontractors in the targets and the change, because the subcontractors were almost like homogeneous. You know, they were the same religion from the same sex, same religion from the same country. And there was nothing that they thought they could do in their contracts to do anything about that, you know, because the contracts were already issued, they were working, there was nothing around about, DEI there at that point. So that then leads me into the next thing, is that I'm suspecting you need to align some of your reporting to your contracting and your procurement as well now.
Yeah, if you can get that information, right? It
might be an element of the actual tendering process that you have to give that information. Yeah.
Yes, we had one prospect reach out to us because they said, we had a customer that wanted to know what their emissions were, what emissions in our process were they responsible for, and it took us 2 months to figure that out. When we were done, another customer called. Right, so now you have to go back to the drawing board and pull all that information. So that is another reason for any organization to have an ESG reporting, so that they can, if they are part of a supply chain, be part of their customers' information. But what you were saying earlier is during the procurement process, I've spoken at some events here in the United States. There was a woman talking about creating a survey / scorecard for the vendor prior to engaging, and communicating what their ESG goals were in the communication to the vendor, so that they could say, we need you to be on board with what we're trying to accomplish, because your emissions and your behavior is going to be part of, it's one thing for us to be really, to your point, we're really, diverse and equal, and yet I have a supplier that is not. And how does that play into what I'm trying to achieve? So if you're doing that prior to engaging with a contractor, we actually went through that at Orion. We're working with an organization in Australia, and they had us go through this online, and it wasn't easy. There were a lot of questions, and we were like, a lot of it didn't apply, because again, we're service, right? And there were a lot of questions around, the materials and where do you source your materials. So luckily we were like, no, it's not applicable. But we really had to, dig our heels in and answer questions that, made us think. And it was important to them, because we needed to be as aligned with their goals as possible. And if we weren't, then that partnership wasn't going to work out.
Yeah, I also think that if in competitive tender situations, it might not just go to cost anymore. It might go to, ESG risk. Yeah. Or the risk of having a supplier that could, give you reputational risk in the ESG area. Yeah.
Or other risks. Do I want to, work with a supplier who, unbeknownst to me right now, unless I dig deeper, has a warehouse, on the coast somewhere that, in the next 5 or 6 years, that coast may look a little different than it does now. And now I have a risk of not being able to have that part for my product, because I didn't do my due diligence on the ESG risk of my supplier.
Okay, cool. Right. I'm going to pause to throw it out for questions again. And I see someone popped in the Washington Post climate footprint thing, working from home. So I will have a look at that after the call and have a little look at it. But yeah, we've talked about some great topics there, wide-ranging ones actually. So anyone else like to come in with anything, any element, any?
Scott, I just wanted to mention, I posted a link to a really good book I read last year.
Mhm.
I was part of this IEEE sustainability work group, and it's called Net Positive. And one quote from the book I put there that I think really can help the C-suite understand: companies that embrace the SDGs by 2030 stand to gain 12 trillion and 380 million jobs globally. It is the biggest opportunity in history waiting to be unlocked. So this is also a very real story. It's not just a story that's hypothetical. It's written by one of the authors is the CEO of Unilever. So it's his journey to take parts of Unilever on this journey. It's really interesting. I found it interesting.
Yeah, and it's a pity Nina wasn't here. Unilever is like one of the best case studies for ESG. And it's also got some like horror stories happened as well. It's
yeah, I'm sure it's also because it's so big, right? And a lot of the things they do are by acquisition. So you have to look at the parts. Even the CEO would admit it's not holistic.
yeah. It's I think it's lumpy as well. And I think because this is the global element we're talking about again. I think the failures were in Africa. Yeah.
Scott, I'll jump in with another question. That's right.
Definitely.
So I was interested in, you were just talking around helping these organizations interpret or collect their ESG data. And you said there's a bunch of interpretation you need to do, make sure you're aligned with the business goals when you're doing that interpretation. I'd just be interested, what sort of level of interpretation is there? And do you find that challenging in terms of trying to maintain a level of what's the right word I'm looking for? Trying to make sure that you're sort of almost an external auditor in this, and making sure that you're providing an accurate view of what the data should be saying, and not being swayed too much by an outcome that the business may want you to get to. So a couple of questions in there really. The first one is, what sort of level of interpretation is there across the board when you're looking at this data? And how do you keep that sort of impartiality, was the word I was looking for, when it comes to doing that interpretation of the data?
That's a great question. The data is, from an emission standpoint, the data is pretty cut and dry, right? This is the energy I use, this is my emissions factor, this is my emissions. When you start looking at the S&G, I think that does get a little more subjective.
Okay.
And that, so there's two elements here. From the tool that we use, there is a way to lock down the data, and there is a way to get an external auditor to be able to log in and see the audit trail of where that data came from. So you can get an external auditor who has not had hands on the data to say, yes, I see the origin of the data. This looks like it's clean and legitimate and appropriate for report. Now, the report itself is where you get the interpretation. It's so whoever is writing your final ESG report is going to take that data and put it in the best light they can, right? Because no one's going to come out with an ESG report that says, yeah, we really didn't do well this year, unless that's just a really bad year and there's no way around it. You're gonna have to put that in the best light you possibly can, and that is going to be subjective by the person who's writing that report. However, the more transparent you can have, the more transparency you can have in an ESG report, and the more anyone reading it can understand how you came to those conclusions, can take some of that away, even if they disagree with you.
Yeah.
At least they know how you got there.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's more the narrative you're talking about as opposed to the raw data. And it comes back to your point earlier around needing to drive towards standardized reporting so that you can compare apples with apples across organizations, not having to digest narrative reports to try and work out what the comparison is.
Exactly.
Just building on that, so there will be sector reporting on how each of the companies are going. Yeah. And if you've got a competitor, so let's pick let's pick somewhere I've never worked on. Hotels, right? I've never worked in hotels, so no one can think I'm talking about any hotel that I've worked with, right? So you're one chain of hotels, and there's another chain of hotels that have got looking better than you in their ESG, and in that kind of the aggregation and the reporting. So I go and look and do some things, and almost it's illegal to kind of falsify your tax, but you can get experts who'll come and make it efficient. Yeah, do you think we're going to see a lot of this? People positioning their accounts just to look better in their sector, and Hotel X looking at Hotel Y and picking what they're good at.
I can't imagine that's not happening now. When you have a couple things, and I'll speak about the United States. You have a couple things going on. Number one, it's voluntary. So what we found with our clients, and it's been very interesting. So if we look just at the environmental, it's broken down into scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and each of those scopes reflect different aspects of energy use, basically. And we have some clients say we just need scope 1 and 2. We have other clients that say we only want scope 3. So how do you actually report accurately when you know from the get-go that the data is incomplete, and so they'll see that in their report. Here's our scope 1 and here's our scope 2, and our plan is in 2 years to implement scope 3. Well, that's great, but that's not really an accurate depiction of your emissions if you're picking and choosing what it is you want to report. And if you start looking at, like, in organizations that have investments or banks that have loans, if you have a $1 million loan to a new construction and the construction is $10 million, then that bank owns 10% of the emissions that construction is happening. Now it's construction site. Is there a true accounting of all the emissions from all of the contractors that are building that building, that can report back to the owner, that can report back to the bank? And most likely not yet, right? These are far-reaching, scope 3 emissions that people and in these organizations are just starting to understand the impact that they have, that's outside of the 4 walls of their building or their office. So a truly accurate ESG report, to the best of an organization's ability, I can't imagine that there isn't some element of it that has to be estimated. Yeah. These feel like accountancy problems that have been around for years, or risk Sarbanes-Oxley type problems that have been around for years, and the standards and practices, and then things that people can get audited against. And it seems that we're running ahead of those professional standards at the moment. Yeah.
But Scott, we've seen this in financial services for years. There's lots of tables, and there's lots of ratings agencies and all that sort of stuff. Most companies don't want to be at the top, and most companies don't want to be at the bottom. Most companies kind of want to be in the middle with everybody else. And I think there's going to be a lot of that, whether it's green wishing or green washing. I think there's going to be both of those kind of elements.
I think, and to build on that, there are some financial services companies that would have a disproportionately huge effect on climate change because, for instance, they own so many shares of fossil fuel companies, right? And so if they want to just move to the middle only, that's not, that's a little discouraging, but I certainly appreciate your realistic view.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that you know, if I was running a big financial organization, I'd be looking at not just what I could do, what good I could do, and I would be looking at the returns I could do. I'd also be looking at how the analysts would look at my portfolio if I took oil out, and it could be I could drop a rating or something, which would have more impact on my business than putting in a partial data ESG, I'd imagine.
The thing is, though, that investing in upgrading transmission systems, national grids, and also into power generation should generate large returns in the long and even in the medium term, because of the amount of investment that's going to be required to update these networks in order to support the new ambitions of a cleaner and greener world. And there isn't a national grid out there. And you sort of think that a continent like Africa might well be at the back end of that, but it's true to say that the US is also far from ready for a BEV world, far from ready from that, because of all of the transmission networks that need to be upgraded, and the cost of that is going to run into trillions of dollars. So, I personally don't know if, for example, a 2030 ambition is really sustainable. I think that 2050 is more sustainable, even though I don't particularly like to say that. I think just the cost of upgrading all of these networks is going to be that huge that it's unaffordable. The other thing that I wanted to say was just briefly on the generation side. I did a report for Scott a little while ago. Maybe he will share it, I don't know. But it was quite an interesting exercise for me, because three things that I have thought about in terms of necessities for a modern world are fusion, superconductivity, and photon entanglement. Two of those things are involved with electricity. Fusion, there's huge investment going into fusion at the moment, which is a good thing, I think. And hopefully something good will come of that. I know that recently there was an experiment in California where finally they got more power out of a fusion experiment than they put into it, which was great. So it's a step in the right direction. Also, something else that I've become aware of is geothermal technology, which is being investigated by a company called Quaise, which is an offshoot of MIT. And they have developed I think it's called a gigatron drill, which uses a millimeter wave fusion laser effectively on the front of their drill to drill to depths that are unheard of and also fairly cost effective. So there's information out about that, not a lot, but so the future looks good, but whether it's immediately durable is questionable, even in countries like the US, and so on. So kind of the decisions you see going on at the moment in Europe, for example, and the protests that you see on Sunday in Berlin and so on. I don't know that they're really going to have the desired result. I think they're just going to create problems. They're shifting the problem from one society into another, and that's not a sustainable solution either. But anyway, that's it's kind of what I.
Just to change direction a bit, because I've suddenly spotted the time.
Yeah,
I was gonna show the Mother Earth video, and the Apple Mother Earth. I'm not sure if everyone's seen this. I've had it. It's the first video I've had sent to multiple people to me. And if you haven't seen it, I think you might enjoy this.
Welcome to Apple. Welcome to Apple. Hi, I'm Tim.
She should be here any minute.
How is the weather coming in? Hi, I'm Tim.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the offices already carbon neutral thing, right?
Yeah, all yours.
I hope we didn't keep you waiting.
Mother Nature.
Mother Nature, welcome to Apple. How is the weather getting in?
The weather was however I wanted it to be. Let's cut to the chase. In 2020, you promised to bring Apple's entire carbon footprint to zero by 2030. Henry David Thoreau over here said we have a profound opportunity to build a more sustainable future for the planet we share.
I think our 10 o'clock said the same thing.
They all do. All right. This is my third corporate responsibility gig today, so who wants to disappoint me first?
Well, we've got some updates we're excited to share with you.
Materials, status.
Is there a materials person here?
Yes, we are in the process of eliminating all plastic from our packaging by the end.
Let me guess. 50 years from now when someone else is left holding the bag?
By the end of next year, actually.
And we're also currently using 100% recycled aluminum in the enclosures of all our MacBooks, Apple TVs, Apple Watch.
What about iPod Shuffle? It's a joke. Don't you people make Ted Lasso?
Oh, that's a different group.
We're also phasing out leather in our iPhone cases.
What about Brando over there? They phasing you out too?
Oh,
What's next?
electricity.
Electricity, status.
We're operating on 100% clean electricity.
What runs on 100% clean electricity?
Every Apple office, store, and data center runs on clean electricity, thanks to you and your powerful wind and sun.
And Apple offices are already carbon neutral.
This building is carbon neutral?
Oh, yeah, we do it with a mix of clean energy and eliminating greenhouse emissions. It's kind of like if you were to...
You're seriously explaining carbon neutrality to Mother Nature?
Right, no, sorry.
You want to tell me how photosynthesis works too? Don't.
Also, over 300 suppliers have committed to using 100% clean, renewable electricity.
What's next?
Transportation.
I'm proud to report that we're shipping more products by ocean rather than air, which reduces transportation emissions by 95%.
95%? Not too bad.
I'm also happy to report that we're investing in projects around the world that protect the Earth's soil, plants, and trees.
Everyone says they're planting trees.
We've planted forests.
Oh, hello.
Where?
Paraguay, Brazil.
What, are you trying to save the tropical savanna?
Yes. And we've also restored mangroves in Colombia.
What else?
Grasslands in Kenya.
Why?
Our aim is to permanently remove carbon from the atmosphere.
What about your water usage?
We've reduced it.
By how much?
63 billion gallons.
63 million?
Billion.
As you can see, we've innovated and retooled almost every part of our process to reduce our impact on the planet. But there's still a lot more work to do.
And there's something else we wanted to share with you.
You're not trying to bribe Mother Nature with Apple swag.
It's Apple's very first carbon neutral product.
I want to see you do more of this.
You will.
When?
By 2030, all Apple devices will have a net zero climate impact.
All of them?
All of them.
They better.
They will.
Okay, good. See you next year. Don't disappoint your mother.
Okay, I mean, back in the room. Yeah. So what do we think about that? I've seen a lot of press. I've seen a lot of press both ways.
There are just a couple of problems with Apple. And one of them is right to repair. And without right to repair, and Apple is not a supporter of right to repair at all. Until Apple has right to repair, anything that they say about green stuff really doesn't wash too much with me, I'm afraid to say. And well, I'm not unfortunately an Apple user. I enjoy using Apple. I use Apple products every day, but I am not under any illusion about the fact that they are not easily repairable by users, and I don't like that. I don't think that's right. And at this point, because of cost and all sorts of stuff like that, we're starting to contemplate that quite seriously as to whether we should continue down the Apple road or not. It's just ridiculous. And yeah, right to repair, big deal.
Yeah, I think that as part of the circular economy, that's going to get legislated more in Europe, and I think Apple
exactly.
But I think
exactly.
I think what will happen is Apple will respond to Europe and then roll it out globally.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. The only reason that you see USB-C in Apple products now is because of the EU, and the only reason you're going to see a user replaceable battery in the next 2 years from Apple is going to be because of the EU, and that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Ellen, bring you in here. What's your thinking on it? I like the fact that all the parts of the company were together in the video and they were all reporting unified in a unified way. I felt like there's been a coherent discussion. Yeah. What do you think, Ellen?
Yeah. The first time I saw that, on the surface, I liked it. I felt that it had enough humor, that it opened up a conversation that's usually an ESG report that can be, really long, and as we've discussed, very subjective, and got to the point of things. It did show, Scott, to your point, a boardroom. As we've been saying, this is not just a department, this is across an organization. So I think they hit some good key points about ESG in general. And they've started a conversation, right? Whether you like Apple or you don't, whether you believe what they say or you don't, they have started a conversation around ESG. So for all those reasons, I think the video is very good. Now, turn the page and you start to say, do everything you're saying here, I have to buy a new one, right? I can't repair my old one. What happens to the old one? It's great that their new products are using recycled materials. Are they using them from their old products? Like, where is that material coming from? Is there a circular economy going on that they didn't share, or what, right? And I've also seen, other things around how they're getting to carbon neutral, and the only way, in my opinion, the only way anyone can get to carbon neutral is through carbon credits or offsets. And that opens another conversation on the legitimacy of those, and how are they being used. And so there's a lot to unpack about that video. I do feel that, the fact that they opened the conversation, they did certainly put themselves out there to be vulnerable. I read one review that said, Scott Cook isn't an actor. And, I think he wasn't meant to be an actor. He was meant to be the CEO. I think everyone in there was meant to be, legitimately, not acting. So for all those reasons, I think it has value in the ESG conversation. But you can call them out on a handful of things, as I can't imagine there's any organization out there that could put something like that together and not be called out, right? I don't know of any organization who's got, 100% doing everything right. And you can never please all the people all the time. So I applaud that they came out with this, and that they started the conversation on both sides of the table.
Cool. And anyone else want to come in? It's good to get an end and a bit of a discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate, Scott. Thanks for sharing. It's always nice to have a little uplift during the day. And also, I fully agree with the comments made. But, you know, it's interesting because I feel like it's a start anywhere journey. You got to start somewhere. So maybe it's a start somewhere. One thing that one thought that I had too was, you know, we are obsessed with kind of carbons and emissions, but there are other parts of the computational process that really don't deal with that. It's like one-time extraction of rare earth metals, right? That's like, it took the Earth 3.8 billion years to form them. You extract them once, if you can't reuse them, then we're kind of in trouble. One really enlightening book that just, if any of you guys, I think Ellen mentioned, she's a technologist, I'm a technologist as well. Kate Crawford's Atlas of AI. Oh my gosh, that book blew my mind because she goes into the actual physical production of AI, starting with all the properties of what it takes to build a computer. And I don't remember the exact figures, but like basically if you dig up tons of dirt in the earth, you're only like 0.02% of that is going to be your rare earth metals. So just right there, you know, when you think about the level of extraction it takes probably to build one computer, it's a lot. So, but you know, this is one of those things that for anybody trying, let's let some big companies start. And then after that, we can all get into the circular economy and other things. But yeah, if you guys like the Atlas of AI, it talks, it's just so many levels, not just the physical properties of computation, but the exploitation that occurs in building artificial intelligence. So it was one of my COVID reads when the governor of California did not allow us to do anything but stay home. I read the book, but it was really life-changing for me because, you know, I felt as a technologist, I really needed to hear all that stuff.
Yeah, and to hop on top of that, it's the water use and energy use now of AI, right? So you're right on all the materials to build the technology in the first place, and now the level of usage is something that needs to be considered because AI has hit the scene with quite the splash, no pun intended. You know, everyone's using it, or almost everyone's using it one way or another. You know, there's a lot of energy and water going into that. So what feels like, well, it's online, you know, I'm not using paper and I'm not using, you know, all these other materials. It's a trade-off, right? And so you need to understand what all, you know, taking a step back, you need to understand all the decisions you make in the course of the day and the impact that they have on the, you know, I'll put it as the future of humanity, because, you know, the planet will be fine without us. It'll be here.
It'll be fine after us as well.
Yeah. Yeah. If you, since we're talking about books, there's one that I really like called Choosing Earth.
Okay.
And that talks about, you know, going down two different paths, right? The technology path and the less technology path, and it comes out with 3 possible outcomes, and I found it fascinating. Not a big fat book, so you can get through it quick, but the 3 outcomes are none of them are happy. I'll put it that way. But I think it's realistic.
Cool. Yeah. One thing I'm kind of, this is our fourth talk, no, 5th talk in the series of the Good Company Way. And on our first talk, Adam Garfunkel said something that really caught my imagination, which was, he's been an environmental activist from the 90s, and he never thought business would get behind this stuff. And that's Apple making a video like Friends of the Earth would have made a video back in 1980 or something. And it's also, it's a hopeful video, you know, it's not saying we're overwhelmed, it's not saying we don't have solutions. And I'd like to see more companies doing that as well. I'd like to see more countries doing that as well, because the narrative is it's all inevitable and it's all overwhelming and it's all going to be existential. And I actually think the carbon reduction thing is a fairly easy problem.
Oh, I don't know that.
Alexa. So I think we're gonna, in our lifetime, we're gonna see carbon production dropping, and we're going to see new technologies coming in. And I think Michael's right on the rate of change. You know, I'm hugely surprised that South Africa is signing up to reducing carbon when they can't keep the lights on. It would seem to be you know, the nation should be keeping the lights on, and then after that, you know, switching to renewables. Yeah.
There's an election coming up.
Yeah.
There's the answer.
Yeah. Mike, you got anything you want to reflect on? You're usually my
No, I think in terms of the video, I thought actually Apple were quite brave. They showed, I think as someone said, they've shown a bit of vulnerability, they've shown a bit of humour, and they've demonstrated that they are trying to change stuff. I think, Ellen, as you said, they're not perfect by a million miles, but at least they're actually sticking their flag in the ground to saying we're going to try and do some stuff. So to your point, Scott, it'd be good to see if any other organisations that sort of size come up with something similar. They should, and that sort of thing should be, you know, back to the when you have the old annual general meetings of all your shareholders for these big corporations. There should be something like that presented to the shareholders. It's not a 50-page book full of numbers that no one reads. In fact, they shouldn't even be printing them anymore. But there should be a presentation to the shareholders in the room. This is what we've done, and this is what we're doing. But they should spend, I would suggest, at least 30, 40, 50% of that meeting on ESG topics, because that's how they're going to keep their investors, how they're going to maintain their shareholders, and that's how they're going to keep their clients happy.
All right, over to you, Ellen, to reflect on that and for the last words.
I agree.
Okay,
that's good.
Seriously, thanks everyone for coming along and making it a great discussion. I've got 3 books on my Kindle now, which I didn't, so this has been quite expensive for me coming along tonight. I love the voices, I love the questions coming in as well, and I just love the honesty as well. So it's been a very honest session. So thanks for everyone for coming. Ellen, thanks for existing.
Thanks for the invite. It was a pleasure. It was great meeting everyone and really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, and I'm glad I met you. It's you're a wonderful person.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Excellent.
Bye everyone. What's our next talk on though before we go? It's going to be he says reaching. Oh, it's the myths of ESG, isn't it?
Myths and legends of ESG.
Yeah, so that's Michael from the ESG show, who's done like multiple episodes interviewing multiple people from around about the world, and we want to see what his kind of view from the production center is on where things are heading. And that he's also a journalist, so and an author, so it'll be interesting to see what he's making of it all. So yeah, that's gonna be really interesting, and we'll get the word out on that one as well.
That's next Tuesday. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Good to see you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.